So one of the questions I am most frequently asked is to recommend disaster books that are for a general audience. There are so many books about disasters, all of varying quality, varying topics, various approaches. I have put together a list of 5 books that I have found myself recommending to other people pretty frequently when they're looking for a book about disasters that's written for a general audience. So I have been recommending this book for almost a decade. It is called One Dead in the Attic After Katrina by Chris Rose. Chris Rose is a reporter at the Times-Picayune in New Orleans. It came out pretty soon after the storm and basically chronicles what was going on in the city. So the next book that I find myself recommending a lot is called A Paradise Built in Hell: The Extraordinary Communities That Arise in Disaster by Rebecca Solnit. She's my favorite. She does a really great job of interrogating what people think happens during a disaster and what human behavior is actually like after a disaster. Human behavior during disasters is actually more helpful and positive than the movies have led us to believe. Emergence and the coming together of communities is something I've done some research on, and is also like an important line of research within disaster and emergency management research, and she turns that into a really compelling story. Next book I have is called Haiti After the Earthquake by Paul Farmer. Basically, this book follows the work of Paul Farmer following the 2010 Haiti earthquake. Paul Farmer is the founder of Partners in Health. How do I say this nicely? I don't like this book. I take issue with a few things. I don't really like the way it's written. It's not my cup of tea. I disagree with a few things in it. That being said, everybody else really seems to like this book, so I think that maybe I'm being a little overly critical of it. Because so many other people like it, I do still kind of recommend it. I often give this caveat of I didn't personally like it, and once you read it, let's chat about what I didn't like about it. This was kind of a book I got halfway through and then I started reading every other page because I was like, okay, I get it. Take it with this grain of salt that I'm not a huge fan. This one is one of my all-time favorite disaster books. It is called All Hands: The Evolution of a Volunteer-Powered Disaster Response Organization by David Campbell with Catherine Friedman. So there are 3 related but separate things that I study most in emergency management. The first are emergent groups. Those are new groups that form during and after disaster to help address the needs that are in a community. The second thing I study are nonprofits and their role in emergency management. And the third thing I study is disaster volunteerism. This book combines all 3. It's so exciting. All Hands is a disaster response and recovery organization that was started by this guy, David Campbell, following the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. David Campbell was really moved by what happened with the Indian Ocean tsunami and basically began this journey to create this organization. They have now grown to be a major national disaster organization. This book is really great because it tells this really engaging story of the formation and evolution of their organization and the different challenges that they've faced and all of the different people that they've found to help them along their journey. So I don't know that they necessarily realize this, but based on the research, this is kind of the textbook example of how disaster organizations form. So this is a really great case study, but it's also really representative of what we see disaster organizations go through. The last book that I find myself recommending pretty frequently, and also encountering people from outside the disaster world who have read this book, is The Unthinkable: Who Survives When Disaster Strikes and Why by Amanda Ripley. Amanda Ripley is a journalist who wrote this book about people who have experienced disaster and the thought process and behavioral instincts that helped them survive. This is one of the first disaster books that I ever read that wasn't like a case study book of a single disaster, that kind of talked across disasters. which I think is really interesting and something that is lacking in the disaster genre. Most disaster books are a case study of a single book. So I like that this book takes a single issue and kind of zeroes in and focuses on it. She's a journalist, so it's an easy read. It's really accessible, but she talks about the science behind what she's explaining, which is obviously very interesting to me. Those are the books that I find myself recommending the most, and also the books that I hear non-disaster folks mentioning that they have read. I have put the titles of all of these down below.